Thank you, Peter, very much. I thought you were going to say beyond patrol, but we've done that part of it. Happy to be here, obviously. It's interesting, celebrating your 60th anniversary reminded me that I also was a keynote speaker at the 50th anniversary. I don't know if I should be happy about that or worried about that. I'm not going to be here for your 100th anniversary, I can tell you. But at that time I spoke about a sparkling Europe, and we talked about innovation, safety and hygiene. I think we've delivered on innovation, safety and hygiene. I'm not so sure we've delivered on sparkling Europe, but that's a challenge that obviously we should all be part of. I like what Mac was saying about leadership. We need that more than ever. I think if there's any lack in this world, there's not a lack of resources, in the sense that, in due respect, Jan has rightfully talked about, there's a lack of leadership. And at the end of the day, many of the issues that we face can be solved if we want them to be solved. And it really starts with ourselves. If you see the people who really care in Europe or anywhere in the world, they're called the caring, concerning caretakers, we call them. We talk too much to people today about restrictions and what they cannot do. You need to talk about people, what it means for their future generations. How can you just come home and, if you have 2 children, 3 children, 4 children, doesn't matter, and look them in the eye and said, we stole from you. We give you something that is absolutely no chance. We use more resources than we can replenish. And we didn't even try to correct it. I'm not sure we will have all the answers in our short time that we are at the helm of our companies or influence the strategies of our companies, but we sure owe it to them and others that we do something about it. And it was Benjamin Franklin who basically said, you may delay, but time will not, and lost time will never be found again. And we're at that moment now that is pretty crucial. And it's for us to decide how we want to live that. We're very fortunate to belong to the less than 1% of the world population that can do what they want. I go around the world to many different places. Last week I was in Pakistan or in Bangladesh. And unfortunately, there are many people who don't have a choice. They barely scratch day and night to make a living, a few dollars a day. They're amongst those 3 billion people who live on less than $2 a day. They don't have a choice. They don't have a choice, but they have the same aspirations as we do. We are very fortunate. We're amongst that small group of people that is educated, can decide what they want to do with their lives, how they want to live it. The same way as the story that Mac shared was his Gandhi example. And it would be unfortunate if we don't use all these resources to the benefit of the greater good. And that is really what this is all about. And this industry has an enormous opportunity to do that. And I'm very pleased, and I give Janos a lot of credit to have started the European Resource Efficiency Platform, because nowadays to do these things take a lot of courage, and he's taken that courage. And there is no political gain in that, and yet we all understand that growth and sustainability are integrally linked. And yet we have to fight as if people want to pull them apart. You cannot have growth anymore without sustainability. And it's actually interesting that increasingly business makes that point. We need to find these solutions together, because the challenges are simply too big for any of us to do it alone now. But this industry is actually ideally placed to help us find these challenges. When I came here, I was at the airport, and as you normally do, you listen in to other people talking. I know it's very unpolite, but in the Netherlands we seem to be used to that. And I heard these 3 people talk, and one was a doctor, and one was an engineer, and one was an economist. And the doctor said, we have the oldest profession. And I said, why is this? He said, well, if you go back to the book of Genesis, when Eve was born, it came out of the rib of Adam. That was probably the first operation that was ever performed on Earth. So we have the oldest profession. The engineer said, no, we do. Because when there was chaos, we created the universe. And you need engineers for that, to order that and put it proper. And the economist said, I think we have the oldest profession, because who created chaos in the first place? And this is where we are. Now, it is very interesting to me that the organization, if I looked at the chart, started in 1952. Because in 1952 was actually the European Treaty of Steel and whatever it was called then, coal and steel, which the Netherlands, Luxembourg, Belgium were the first ones part of. And these people had great visions. You had Monet at that time, or Schumann, that really said, we want to do something on the greater good. The same thing that drove my father or many others. They had seen the war, they didn't want to be part of it. They had lost out on going to school. No opportunity that they certainly didn't want to deprive others of. And they had just one simple objective, which is the greater common good. And then we became the I society versus the we society. And probably the crisis in 2008, that Jan has rightfully referred to, was probably more of a crisis of ethics or realization that the way we were doing things is simply not sustainable. And this is a huge opportunity to seize this moment of reflection and turn it into an enormous force for positive. And I think we're at that verge of doing that, obviously. It is no surprise to me that this organization was actually born in 1952 when actually others were thinking about that broader vision. We've had tremendous years of prosperity since then. There's no doubt about that. Many people lifted out of poverty. Capitalism or globalization, if I may say, really functioned. I wouldn't be standing here were it not for that. It gave me the right to be educated, to have an opportunity like anybody else. It has brought the world much closer together. 500 million people lifted out of poverty. So it was a good thing. But we've also discovered, I think by now, that not all the things actually add up as well as we thought they were. In fact, when stock markets were going up 10–15% a year continuously, we thought everything was well and few questions were being asked. We're getting into a period a little bit that is more difficult. That requires more from us and that requires more from our industry. And this is really what I want to spend a few words on to talk about. A lot of people challenge capitalism. In fact, if you now go to Amazon.com or other things, you'll find more books about capitalism than about anything else. Socially responsible capitalism, the new face of capitalism, capitalism reinvented. I'm actually thinking myself about writing a book called 50 Shades of Capitalism. I think that has a lot of potential. But people are right. The system that we have, obviously, where we've come to, where too many people are excluded or don't feel that they participate, is a system that is increasingly being challenged. There's nothing wrong, you know. I like Winston Churchill, who actually said democracy is the worst form of government except for all the other ones that were invented. And the same can be said about capitalism. You know, we haven't really figured out something better, but we have to figure out how to make it fully work. And that means sustainable, as Janis was saying, but it also means equitable. Any system where too many people are excluded or don't feel that they are participating ultimately will be rebelled against. That was actually at the origin of the Arab Spring, if you want to, or the Occupy Wall Street movements. So any responsible business, any responsible person understands that. And if you're not part of that solution or wanting to be part of that solution, you will be increasingly isolated. It's not only anymore a question of good business sense or businesses being to operate in societies that function. We understand all these arguments. But we are going to be rejected by consumers very quickly, who is going to vote with their wallets. That is what should be, for many who haven't bought into the intellectual argument, perhaps, or who don't have children, should be enough of a driving force. KPMG just came out with a report a few weeks ago, because Ivo de Boer works there now, so it's all about climate change. But they said, if you take 30 years from now, and our industry, the consumer goods industry, doesn't do anything, the total profit will be wiped out. And take it. We can all start debating the report again, but I think he's pretty close to the truth. Just last year alone, because of all the climate changes that we have, be it in the Far East with the floodings or the droughts or any of them that we now nearly seem to have on a monthly basis, a company like ours incurred about 250 million euros of additional cost. It is happening as we talk. And I think business understands that more than ever. And you saw that certainly in Rio, where the Rio declaration that came out was probably the lowest common denominator, unfortunately, with good intentions. But it's very difficult to get 190 people around 190 countries around the table now and get something constructive out of it. But there were 200 big initiatives from business. 1,800 businesses were represented. So there's something happening in this world, I think, that is more important that we should seize on, like you do with your resource efficiency initiative, and capitalize on to get going. There are three major trends that really drive this, and it's good to see these three major trends because it really drives it home. The first one, obviously, is the trend of the changing world order. Kishore Mahbubani, who teaches at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Management, talks about the new Asian hemisphere. The enormous population growth that is still happening in the emerging markets. People forget, by the way, that there will be 80% of the population in 20 years' time. And we all think it turns around us. Soon it will not. That's why it's important, by the way, to keep a European Union together. It's our only possibility to survive long term. But anyway, 80% of the population will be there as the world goes to 9 billion. And you see an enormous change in economic forces. For a company like mine, we already have 60% of our business outside of Europe or the US. It's about 85 to 90% of our growth right now. But it also creates some problems. It creates a dynamic at the global level that is destabilizing. These power bases that are changing because of these economics that are changing, politicians have a problem dealing with that. Because our institutions, our political systems are not adjusted to this increasingly interdependent world and to these changes. Politicians have a hard time internalizing these global challenges as a result, and that's why you have, in fact, this year, 60% of the world GDP was in elections, and only 75% of the politicians don't get re-elected. You have to be pretty courageous nowadays to be a politician. And we like to criticize them, but it's more important to support them. But what is happening is you see a major force like the US, who has always been a global steward of moral standards. If we like it or not is a separate debate, but they've been a global steward of standards that we operate under, is shrinking back to its own territory, and the Chinese and the Indians are simply not willing to take at this point in time that responsibility that comes with size. So you'll go to a period of 10 years of a political vacuum. That's why you don't see conclusions on Doha rounds or what is now happening with the climate change rounds, or that's why you don't see agreements coming out of Rio, or that's why we seem to struggle so much to come with solutions in Europe, what sometimes for some of us look like very simple issues that need to be solved. And that creates an enormous opportunity for business to step in and take that responsibility or co-responsibility to come with solutions. I know trust in business is low, but that's a great thing. Because if the base is low, you can only go up. One of my bosses told me once, the best you can get if you get a new job is a low base and a lot of reserves. We have both. We have a lot of reserves and goodwill and energy that we can build, and we have that low base. But business needs to step up to the plate. That's the trend number one, these changing world orders. And we're in for another 10 years of that struggling before someone really steps in or we've adjusted these institutions. It's not good or it's not bad, it's just realizing that. The second trend, obviously, that you know better than I do, is in the enormous interconnectivity that is happening in the world. There's something happening that people don't fully realize yet, which is 2.5 billion people are on internet. 1.5 billion people are on social sites. The third biggest country now after China and India is Facebook, with over 1 million people. It's obviously driven by the young, but increasingly they are connected with each other. And they're floating around these institutions or these bottlenecks that are coming up, desperately looking for solutions. You know, in the emerging markets, 50% of the population is below 29 years old. 50%. And interestingly, they've discovered that they're 100% of tomorrow's population. And they do care, despite what you read, despite what people try to tell you. And increasingly, they're voting with their feet. It is not surprising that the riots in Tunisia started with food. It was a food vendor. It's more than symbolic. In Egypt, Mubarak has been there a long time, a very strong regime, very embedded. And yet it took only 17 days to topple that regime. We organize on Facebook, we talk to each other on Twitter, and we show the world what we do on YouTube. These connections are happening, and they're happening increasingly. This digitization of the world is an enormous force, and so are the young. And that gives me hope we need to tap into. And it's incredible now that everything you do, take Earth Day, 2 billion plus people participating. The Global Citizens Festival had over 2 billion impressions that they did. I'm very fascinated by, I'm not going to do that here for you, but the Gangnam Style has nearly 1 billion people watching it. And doing it, by the way. We're getting the whole world to do something. Why not use that energy to do something good, for heaven's sake? And we can change things. That force is going to be enormous. Obama got re-elected by social media. Don't be mistaken. I don't think his track record was very good without showing my political colors. But 6 times more people, 300 million donations, impressions, participations on the internet. 6 times more than his first election. I think Romney totally missed the boat there. And all these people that supported him were in fact these savvy people, smart enough to make the decisions they have made, if you want to. The third trend, which is obviously what Jana's referred to, is the end of the era of abundance. We just, you know, with 2 billion more people coming, we're already living in a world that WWF says uses 1.5 times the world's resources. 3 of the 8 biomarkers are already passed: nitrogen levels, CO2, and biodiversity. We're already at the point that is below 5 minutes, that is beyond 5 minutes before 12. And this is before another 2 billion people come into this world. And guess what? If you go to these developing markets, all of them aspire to live like Americans. And if you don't live like Americans, already now you need 5 planet Earths. I don't know about you, but I learned in school we only have one, and I think the mission to Mars hasn't really discovered anything that gets me excited. We have to change the things we're doing there, otherwise it just doesn't add up. And again, it doesn't require much. Now, our starting point is not that good either. And this comes back to my comment on capitalism. Our starting point actually is kind of worrying, because there are some people out there that use the Milton Friedman type of reasoning that the price mechanisms and the markets will correct all these things, as you've probably heard undoubtedly many, many times. Whilst I'm a big supporter of capitalism, don't misunderstand me, the market hasn't helped there to the fullest extent as what we thought. How could it otherwise be that 1 billion people go to bed hungry today, not knowing if they wake up the next day? How could it be that even in today's world 3 billion people live on less than $2 a day? How could it be that 2 to 2.5 billion people don't have access to basic hygiene or water? Or how could it be that a child dies every 6 seconds of hunger as we talk here? So this world doesn't have a good starting point, even if these challenges are coming. And it's obviously key, as we look at these solutions, that business starts to become more involved. Too many businesses have been bystanders, operating under the principle of how can I use society and the environment to be successful. I think we have to go back to our fathers who grew up in the Second World War, who looked at the common good and say, how can we give to society and the environment to be successful? Many companies have sustainability reports. I call it page 2, often a post-rationalization of what they do to be a little bit better or justify what they sell. It's not good anymore. You really have to become a force to improve what is there. Improve food security. You know, it only takes 1% more food to have these billion people not go to bed hungry. We don't seem to care because we waste about 30% ourselves. And the other 30–40% we pump into ourselves to make diabetes to the biggest epidemic that the world is now facing. Just by rethinking a little bit our food supply and making it sustainable, like we've made a commitment as a company, as a coincidence, you can actually feed the world at 9 billion people, but in a sustainable and responsible way. You don't have to be doomsday scenario here. But we can only get there if we work together and do this smartly. So business has to change its attitude from being a mere bystander, from a license to operate, to a license to lead, to become a solution provider. That requires a mindset, as Mac is talking about, that is the leadership that starts at the top. I believe this industry has this leadership, or we should seize on it. And seize on it actually was a bigger force than we do today. We've had some great initiatives. I've always been proud to belong to this industry. That's why I stand in front of you, again with a sense of pride of what we have achieved. This is an industry that has achieved efficiency standards across Europe. In fact, there are less differences on detergents or some of our other products that we sell than on food. I happen now to represent a company with honor that is both in food and home and personal care products. But we've done a relatively good job to drive efficiencies in our businesses and do that together with Europe and give these benefits to the consumer. We've also done a very good job to drive these efficiencies in terms of resources. I'm very proud to have started, even as others, the compaction initiatives that this industry, and you were mentioning them on your chart, that this industry has done. Now, I was trying to get some numbers on the, I'm actually looking at, trying to see them, but I was trying to find some numbers on what we have done. But if you just take the 2006 alone, this industry has reduced packaging by 55 tons, 55,000 tons, up to 360,000 tons more coming in the next 1 or 2 years. Energy consumption down 20 to 30%. Teaching people how to wash at lower temperatures. From the 90 degrees, if you go back to our parents, to now 10, 20 degrees. Water usage, very, very small. We've made our major contributions here, and we know how to do that. But obviously, the goalposts have changed. And that is what we now need to step up on the plate. Janus, for the interest of time, Janus has talked about the resource efficiency initiative, and I think this industry should take a leading role in supporting that, but also saying concretely, what can we do to actually add to these specific targets and goals that are being set around some of these specific markers of energy or water or resource usage. There is we are very long on words and documents and very short on specific actions right now globally. And I think if we take that as one of our action steps, would be very, very good. We've put a consortium together of major retailers and major manufacturers for one little reason, is to create a critical mass of trying to do the right thing for the long term. And one of the things we've decided on is by 2020 not to sell any products anymore that come from illegal deforestation. Illegal deforestation is about 20% of global warming. And again, it's driven by food, the need for food and to feed the world. Tremendous demands for pulp, paper, palm oil, soy, beef, that actually drives that. In fact, every second we still lose 1 acre of land. That's a disaster. Disaster already happening. If our consumer goods industry that we all represent says we will not sell any more palm oil from illegal deforestation by 2020, we actually sent an enormous signal up the supply chain. It allowed us to create a roundtable of sustainable palm oil. It allowed us to create coalitions with governments now, and some of them with Christiana now being mentioned in Doha in terms of the contributions that industry can make. And what you find is if you have enough of the people, enough of the companies joining initiatives like that, you get governments to join you as well. And you get critical mass to change things. So next to supporting Janus with his resource efficiency initiative, wouldn't it be good if this industry would be at the foreground of getting out of illegal deforestation, if we all, as companies, make this commitment to buy sustainable palm oil? These would be concrete steps. The same step we have taken to some extent with our hygiene products. Let's not forget, we're not only detergents, we're also cleaning products. Even today, 6 million children die every year of infectious diseases. Diarrhea, pneumonia. 6 million is 3,000 children a day. 3,000 children a day is the equivalent of 10 Boeing 747s full of children. Now what would we do if only one Boeing 747 would come down? And we read it in the papers. Assume you opened your papers today, a Boeing came down, just one, full of children. What would we do? We ground all the planes. We reach out to the families. We take immediate actions to prevent that. Yet 10 are coming down and we don't do anything a day. Our industry with hygiene, tremendous opportunities there. Just washing your hands 4 or 5 times a day can cut infectious diseases by half. That's a great mission. But how can we scale that with governments and others together to really make a lasting difference? These are the type of things we need to work on. I spent some time with Almunia because one of the issues with any of the industry associations and this industry as well is a fear for any of the competitive laws that are out there. And one of the things was, again, today in the paper was I believe it was the electronics industry that this time was mentioned. And it creates an enormous uncertainty of doing the right thing. So we need the European Commission also to think about some of the things within the spirit of protecting the consumer and the law by any standards that makes the industry more comfortable to work together on some of these big initiatives. Right now, I cannot get a group of people together to see how much sustainable palm oil they buy because I risk being accused of a buying cartel. So for the commissioner as well, we need to be out there and try to change some of the frameworks whilst maintaining the spirit of what we want to maintain. It is also clear that we need to find the right balance, obviously, because between what we call overprotection of the consumer and a very precautionary approach with some of the actions that we take that are probably with a broader framework in mind. Our products are getting more concentrated, they are becoming more resource efficient, but we have to be sure that the standards of how we measure risk are also appropriately adjusted. I also would like to see at a European level incentivize some more behavior. I just came from India where the Indian government now has agreed to have a 4% differential on palm oil for import. We've talked to Pascal Lamy to be sure that nobody in the WTO is going to complain about that. But actually, personally, I'm hoping that one of these countries will complain. Because I'd love to go to Brussels, to the WTO, and argue publicly with any of these countries how they're going to defend unsustainable palm oil. How you can attack an incentive for someone to do the right thing. So having differential tariffs between sustainable and unsustainable products, Europe should set the standards in that. And then last but not least, for the same reason as we need to bring the passion back for Europe amongst the population at large, and especially the young people who have lost their faith in their own futures. In fact, social cohesion is going to be a bigger problem than some of the things we're talking here today. We need to reach out and communicate. So we need to enroll these consumers with positive incentives to get these behaviors out there. Palm oil, if I stay with that topic, it's very difficult to get consumers excited about that and to understand, as you rightfully say, sometimes labeling is the problem, but it probably runs beyond that in terms of getting the consumers to be incentivized with actions. So there is work to do for the Commission that we need to be embracing. There's work to do for us as an industry to step up. If we do it, there's no doubt that we will, but if we do it with a critical mass, with all of us, we really can have a difference. Be it on the illegal deforestation, be it on the sanitation, or be it on the use of resources at large. And then we can come home at night and look our children in the eye, whatever children we have, wherever they are, and look them in the eye, but then we can tell them, we not only tried, we actually left you a future that is for you to enjoy as well and for many generations to come. Thanks for your attention.